Alright, so this is going to be the first video on macromolecules. So you'll notice I'm in page 31 of your student notes. So I would pull your notes up and follow along as you watch this video. And remember, there will be a quiz at the end of watching all these videos. So make sure that you're paying attention and taking notes. First up, organic macromolecules. So we know what an organic molecule is. It's a molecule with a lot of carbon, basically, simply said. And then, so what is a macromolecule? So pay close attention to that prefix, macro. What does macro mean? Well, it means sort of the opposite of micro. If micro means small, then macro means big or large. So we're basically looking at big molecules. So there are four main types in biology of macromolecules that we talk about. And you've heard of them before. You're probably familiar with them, but don't know what they are. So if we go back to our table of contents, it has them listed in the order that we're going to talk about them. First, we have carbohydrates. All right, so that is the first macromolecule that you see reoccurring all throughout life on the earth. And then we have lipids. And then we have proteins and nucleic acids. So these are your four main macromolecules. So if I ever ask you in the future, what is the main macromolecule for this? What is its function? What does it look like? You know that I'm talking about one of these four, either carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, or nucleic acids. So the first we're going to talk about polymers. So what is a polymer? So a polymer, these are large molecules that are formed by combining or bonding individual units called monomers. So poly, there's another prefix. Poly, as you're familiar with, means many. And then we have mono, which means one. So a polymer versus a monomer. The monomers are linked together by covalent bonds. Remember that covalent bonds are strong. So this is my favorite part of class. Usually I do this live, but at this point I get to play with baby toys. So this really makes my day. All right, so we have these baby toys that we can link together or break apart. All right, so we're talking about polymers versus monomers. So if this was one individual molecule, what would it be? Would it be a monomer or a polymer? Well, there's only one, so this is a monomer. And then we link it on to many of the other same molecules, and we have polymers. So polymer and monomer is just a fancy way of saying the same molecule that repeats. All right, so here's one individual monomer, here's one individual monomer, 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 monomer. Link them all together, we had a polymer. So this is non-specific, just a general way of saying we've got the same molecule linking it together many times. Monomer versus polymer. So we're going to talk about monomers and polymers with all four types of macromolecules. All right, so moving on. Macromolecules are formed by dehydration synthesis, also called condensation reactions. So think about it. Dehydration synthesis. If you think about what the word means, it might help you understand what's going on there. So what does it mean to dehydrate? If you are dehydrated, then you have a lack of water. So you're losing water. And what does it mean to synthesize something? To make something, right? So when you synthesize, you're making something or you're building something. So during these reactions, monomers are covalently bonded together. The reactions release water as a byproduct. So down here we have a nice diagram, dehydration synthesis. So here we have a small molecule. We have two monomers stuck together, so we have a polymer. Here it has an OH on this end, and we have a small molecule here. So here is a monomer. So the objective here is to attach this monomer to this polymer to make a bigger polymer. So what happens is that this OH adds or bonds to this H. So what is OH plus another H? Well, that would be H2O. All right, so we add some energy to react this bond here. And then what we do is we form a large molecule and we lose a water. So a water is given off in dehydration. So if we look back here at my baby toys, all right, so we have this polymer here, and we want to make it bigger. Maybe we're trying to store energy inside of the body. By we, I mean our cells. This is going on inside of your cells. So what type of reaction will we need to make this happen? Right, a dehydration synthesis. So here we have the OH, and here we have the hydrogen. So whenever energy is introduced, we bond these together. Off comes a water molecule, dehydration, synthesis. We made a bigger molecule. Dehydration, synthesis. Okay, so that's one type of reaction. Now, what if we want to break the molecule down? Well, then we talk about hydrolysis reactions. Lysis means to split. In these reactions, water is used as a reactant. All right, so here, notice it's the opposite of dehydration synthesis. We start off with the large molecule. One of our reactants is water. We release some energy to introduce the OH to one end and the H to another, and then it splits off into two molecules. So looking back at our baby toys here, all right, so we want to remove this molecule here to do what? Why do we want to remove this molecule? Not necessarily just to make this smaller or to get one of these off. Look at the chemical reaction. What is being given off? Energy. So we want to, this molecule that we stored up with the dehydration synthesis reaction, we want to release some of that energy, use it inside of the cell to get stuff done. So we're going to use water to split and pop, break off. Energy is released. So we can then use that energy to do things inside of the cell using a hydrolysis reaction. We used water to split a bigger molecule. Let's keep breaking it down. Hydrolysis, release energy. Hydrolysis, release energy. Hydrolysis, release energy. All right. Getting a little carried away there. All right, so those are your two types of chemical reactions that we're going to talk about for this. Now, let's talk about specifically carbohydrates. So we start talking about groups of organic macromolecules. So what is a carbohydrate? Well, it is a macromolecule, so it is a big molecule, and it is organic, so it has a lot of carbon. So carbohydrates are sugars. In living things, carbohydrates serve as sources of quick energy and as structural building materials. Most carbohydrates names end in the letters OS. And immediately you probably think of sucrose, glucose. Those are carbohydrates. So now we have monosaccharides. So mono, you're familiar with this prefix. It means one. Just like a monomer is one, a monosaccharide is one saccharide. So monosaccharides are the monomers or building blocks of carbohydrates. Sac means sugar, so one sugar. Glucose, fructose, galactose, ribose, deoxyribose. Where do you find that at? DNA. Are common monosaccharides. The general molecular formula for a monosaccharide is C some number, H some number, and O some number. So in the case of glucose, C6H12O6. I'm not sure why that 2 is there, but anyways. In the case of sucrose, we've got C12H22O11. All right. So this is the typical chemical formula for a monosaccharide. So if we have monosaccharides, if we put a bunch of them together, what do we get? You guessed it, a polysaccharide. These are the polymers. These compounds are formed by the bonding together of several monosaccharides. Biologically important polysaccharides include. Now, first, before I move forward, what do you get when you put two monosaccharides together? 1 plus 1. So what prefix means 2? Not bi in this case. It's probably what you thought of, but di. So we can have disaccharides, trisaccharides, until we get to a point where we just have so many, we say polysaccharide. Just really big sugars, basically. All right. So if I ask you in an FRQ, if the question is identify a monosaccharide, glucose, fructose, galactose, notice that sucrose is not right here. Okay. So here are biologically important polysaccharides, starches used as an energy storage molecule in plants. You've all heard of starches before in many different ways. Potatoes are full of starches, so they have a lot of potential energy. Glycogen used as an energy storage molecule in animals like us. We store excess glucose in our livers as glycogen. So here's a question. If you store glycogen in your liver, but it was first glucose, what type of chemical reaction would you use to transform that glucose into the bigger storage molecule, glycogen? You're right, a dehydration synthesis. We're building a bigger molecule in order to store all that excess glucose. Now, what if you have glycogen inside of your liver and you need to use some of that energy because you're running low? What type of reaction? A hydrolysis reaction. We're going to break down that glycogen back into glucose molecules so that we can then use it. We need that carbon for cellular respiration. Okay, and cellulose, used as a structural component for plant cell walls. Cellulose is the most abundant organic compound on the earth. So due to the hydrogen bonds that occur in cellulose, it is very hard for most organisms to digest. And you are no exception. You cannot break down cellulose. You do not have the enzyme required to do so. So can you guess who does that for you? Your bacteria, your beneficial probiotics that live inside of your gut. So whenever you eat plants, and it makes it all the way down to your gut, those little bacteria down there break down the cellulose for you, and now they need it to survive. It is a carbohydrate for them to survive, and you want them to survive because they're there to protect you, help you break down your food, also to keep other bad bacteria at bay. There's a lot of research going into how healthy people are versus the microbiome that a scientist would find inside of them. So very important to take care of your microbiome. And that is cellulose, and then chitin, not chitin, is used as a component of the exoskeleton of some animals and also fungal cell walls. So fungi are very similar to plants in that they have cell walls, except their cell walls are made up of chitin instead of cellulose. Now, these are all polysaccharides. So what is the difference between each one? Well, here's a phrase that I want you to write down and remember. Structure equals function. So if these are all polysaccharides made of basically the same stuff, then what is the key difference? Their structure. Their structure determines their function, and that is true for every molecule that we're going to talk about in this class. If I ask you, why does this molecule do what it's doing, you're immediately going to think about structure equals function. So you have to think, what does its structure look like, and how does it contribute to its function? Although starch, cellulose, and glycogen are all polymers of glucose, the molecules have different shapes. They have different structures. Some of these complex carbohydrates consist of straight chains of monomers, while others consist of branched chains. Because of the orientation of the glucose monomers, many hydrogen bonds form in cellulose and cause the molecule to be very strong and hard to digest, while starch is relatively easy to digest. So cellulose needs to be very strong because plants do not have a skeletal system. The way that they stand upright is due to the cellulose in their cell walls. All right, so that's the end of this video. Take yourself a break, and we're going to finish up with carbohydrates.